Normally, I don't condone violence, but there are times when someone just deserves to get punched in the face. Greetings, friends. If you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Catherine. I am a licensed therapist and a self-certified anime nerd, and this is the place where anime and human psychology intersect. After I made my video analyzing the relationship dynamics in My Happy Marriage and whether they are healthy or codependent, I got a request to make a video on Eren and Mikasa's relationship. This is something that I had been thinking about doing for a while, but I was hesitant to tackle it, largely because Attack on Titan is a very complicated story. There's a lot of details to sift through, a lot of ambiguities, and a lot of different ways to interpret it. The mechanics of how the future influences the past also make it kind of difficult to assess what is going on with the character's psychology. So for all of these reasons, I almost scrapped this video, but I thought that because this anime is one of the most popular animes of all time, and because it deals directly with themes of abuse and trauma, which is my specialty, I thought that I owed it to my viewers to give this analysis my best shot. So I am going to be looking at this story and the relationship between Eren and Mikasa specifically through the lens of trauma theory and attachment theory, and drawing on my knowledge of human psychology to assess what I think is going on here between these two. Normally when I analyze a show, I move more or less in chronological order, but because the last season of this series dramatically changes how we see the first 3 seasons, I'm gonna start with some things that happen at the end. There is a parallel being set up between the founder Ymir and Mikasa. After getting some help from some other YouTube videos on how to interpret the ending, what I can distill is that Ymir was freed in a way by witnessing Mikasa kill Eren, because both of these women have kind of spent their lives enslaved by their love for a destructive man. When Ymir sees Mikasa break free from those chains, she is able to break free herself. Hence the shot that we see where she does not jump in front of the spear hurled at King Fritz. So already there's a lot going on here. I want to start by unpacking this idea that Ymir remained loyal to King Fritz because she loved him. She possessed immense power and easily could have killed him or run away from him at any time, but she continued to carry out his will and protect him at the cost of her own life because she loved him. Now, this explanation is believable, but I feel the need to add a little bit more nuance. I want to start off by actually defining the concept of love. Feminist scholar Bell Hooks has a phenomenal book called All About Love, and in that book she starts out with a definition of love originally written by a psychiatrist named Scott Peck. Peck defines love as the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Explaining further, he continues, "Love is as love does. Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and an action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love, we choose to love. Since the choice must be made to nurture growth, this definition counters the more widely accepted assumption that we love instinctually." Now, I have used this definition of love in my work as a therapist for years, but I hadn't actually gone back and read the source text for a long time until I sat down to work on the script for this video. And when I did look back at the text, I found it so interesting that the definition uses the words will and choice. Because Attack on Titan has a major theme about free will and how much of it do the characters actually have? So how do we apply this definition of love to the relationships in the show? Or can we even apply it? Well, I don't see Ymir's love for King Fritz or Mikasa's love for Eren as choices to extend themselves to nurture the other person's spiritual growth. The way I see it for both of these characters, Love is not an act of will, but actually an act of desperation that is driven by trauma. Let's look at Ymir's story first. At a young age, Ymir is subjected to the horror of chattel slavery, which of course is an incredibly violent and dehumanizing experience. She is treated as an expendable piece of property, but when she acquires Titan power, she all of a sudden becomes valuable. I think what King Fritz offers to Ymir is he makes her feel important. After having your will completely beaten out of you and being dehumanized for so long, it makes sense that you may latch onto this person who values you, even if he only values you to the extent that he can exploit your power. All humans have an attachment system that drives us to seek safety and connection with others. This system remains active throughout childhood and adulthood. It is extremely powerful, and it will drive us to seek refuge and connection with people who treat us poorly, if there are no available options for good people who we can form attachments with. Fritz killed Ymir's parents. She has no one to go back to, even if she did run away. Ymir's love for Fritz is not really love in a romantic sense, and it's definitely not love in the sense of contributing to another person's spiritual growth. It's more similar to a child who honestly professes that they love their parent who beats them. It's not really that they're making a choice to love this person, it's that this person is all they have. And sometimes the prospect of being all alone in the world is genuinely more terrifying than having violence inflicted upon you. And sometimes it's just too much for the psyche to actually process how badly you've been abused. And so clinging on to the love that you feel for this person is a way of protecting yourself against the harsh internal reality of the pain that they have put you through. Now let's look at Mikasa's story. When Mikasa is 9 years old, she goes through this major traumatic event of witnessing her parents get killed, getting kidnapped, witnessing Eren kill her kidnappers, and then committing homicide herself in an act of self-defense. It's not just the violence of this event, but the complete loss of her family that makes this trauma so severe for Mikasa. And she never really deals with it. It's not her fault. She doesn't have great resources. It's possible that therapy doesn't even exist in this society. So here's how I interpret this. Because Mikasa is a child who has lost both of her parents, she latches onto Eren as her new primary attachment figure, which makes sense because he's the one who saved her and he shows her kindness after this ordeal that she's been through. But this attachment is clearly unhealthy. I'm gonna quote from my colleague Jordan Dan here. Protection can sometimes mask difficulty with separation. Mikasa's intense drive to protect Eren is a cover for the fact that she cannot tolerate separating from him. This makes sense because she has already been through so much traumatic loss. She probably wouldn't be able to withstand losing Eren as well. And on top of that, Mikasa's preoccupation with Eren kind of serves as a way of staving off her own unprocessed grief. She's never really been able to deal with her trauma, and so protecting this one person kind of becomes a distraction mechanism that allows her to avoid her own unresolved emotional material. This is a very common feature of codependency. Kids who grow up in dysfunctional families often end up becoming compulsive caretakers. They dedicate all of their energy to managing other people, most often a romantic partner. It's a perpetual task that occupies their attention, thereby avoiding their own pain that's lying below the surface. Now, just because Mikasa's attachment to Eren is driven by her own unresolved trauma, that doesn't mean her feelings for him aren't genuine. I'm sure that she really does deeply care for him, and if asked if Eren's spiritual growth matters to her and she wants to nurture it, she would undoubtedly say yes. But nurturing another person's spiritual growth sometimes requires giving them space to make their own mistakes and develop their own separate identity. And I think that Mikasa really struggles to let Eren do that. What I see in the dynamic between these two is that Eren feels very suffocated by Mikasa. Her insistence on going wherever he goes and basically being his bodyguard leaves Eren feeling very fatigued by the relationship, though I do think that he also deeply cares for her. Eren, of course, also loses his parents, but his trauma manifests very differently than Mikasa's does. Eren's trauma manifests as an obsessive desire for revenge and a compulsion to commit violence against other people. This is a good place to point out, actually, that the whole cast of this show is drowning in severe trauma. This is a series about the horrors of war and genocide, the almost unfathomable scale of pain, loss, and human suffering. And how is everyone dealing with it? One of the wisest lines in the series, ironically, belongs to Kenny Ackerman.
All of us had to spend our lives drunk on something. Else we'd have no cause to keep pushing on.
In this world of unending brutality and suffering, everyone needs to find a drug to numb their pain. Eren's drug is violence and destruction. Mikasa's drug is Eren. These are not two people who are nurturing each other's spiritual growth. These are two deeply traumatized people who are drunk on something. When Mikasa says to Eren in the field, "Thank you for showing me how to live with purpose," that's a very sneaky line. It sounds romantic, but in the context of this particular relationship, I think those words are actually disguising a lot of toxicity. Having a purpose sounds like a nice idea, but you have to ask, what kind of quality of life is that purpose affording you? Does being dedicated to that purpose come at the cost of your own emotional and spiritual development? Mikasa has been so preoccupied with protecting Eren for so long, she doesn't even have contact with any of her own hopes, dreams, or desires. We never see her want something that belongs to her and her alone. What's kind of funny to me is that for the first 3 seasons of this series, I honestly thought that Mikasa was just a poorly written character. Like, I honestly thought that her rigid devotion to Eren at the cost of her own emotional and spiritual development was just one of those bad tropes that female characters in media so often fall into. It's not until this scene when Eren presents this hypothesis that Mikasa has only been protecting him because of something pre-programmed into her bloodline that I started to realize the creator was actually being more intentional with his choices when he was writing Mikasa's character. But even if it was an intentional choice, to me it seems like kind of an unfair one. Let's talk about this scene where Eren asks Mikasa, "What am I to you?" You may be wondering, if Mikasa is really that devoted to Eren at the cost of her own identity, why would she not be honest with him here about how she really feels? Well, here's the thing. This kind of compulsive caretaking and protecting behavior doesn't necessarily mean that a person is capable of vulnerability. It's actually kind of an indication that they are incapable of it. As an Ackerman, Mikasa has this innate physical ability that makes combat quite easy for her. Yes, she's putting herself in dangerous situations, but she consistently wipes the floor with anyone she goes up against. Protecting Eren physically doesn't really require Mikasa to get vulnerable, because vulnerability is exposing some tender part of yourself when there's a lot of uncertainty about what the outcome is going to be. Mikasa probably withholds her true feelings because she doesn't really know if Eren feels the same way about her, and the prospect of him rejecting her would simply be too much for her to handle. After all, she's built her whole identity and her whole life around him. What would she even have left if he rejects her? I have to say that I think this conversation is being very unfair to Mikasa. First of all, because Eren asks her to disclose her true feelings for him, but he doesn't disclose her true feelings to her. He's putting it on her to be the one who gets vulnerable while he refuses to do so himself. And to take it a step further, this conversation is positioned as the fork in the road that determines whether Eren commits genocide or not. And that puts way too much responsibility on Mikasa for Eren's decision making. This really feels like incel mass shooter behavior to me. If this woman tells me that she loves me, I'll run away with her and live a peaceful life. But if she doesn't tell me that she loves me, I'm gonna kill everyone in the world outside my home. I will later tell my man friend that I love her and that I don't want her to be with anyone else, but I'm of course not going to say that directly to her, not unless she says it to me first. Both of these characters are emotionally stunted, to be clear. I'm not surprised that either one of them has difficulty with expressing how they really feel. I just don't like this implication that Mikasa's disclosure or non-disclosure of her feelings is what serves as the hinge point for whether Eren decides to start the rumbling. I know some people interpret the story to mean that Eren didn't really decide, that he truly was a slave to the fate that had already been established and there was no way for him to break out of it. But as a therapist whose job it is to help people tap into their internal sense of agency and take ownership of the choices they have control over, I simply cannot accept that interpretation, especially when Eren himself says that he did this because he wanted to. I believe that Eren feels like he is trapped, but feeling trapped and being trapped are not the same thing. So many times I have heard clients tell me that they feel trapped by whatever their compulsion is. Could be using a substance, it could be a social media addiction, it could be an unhealthy dating pattern, it could be disordered eating behavior. Again and again, I hear some version of this line, I know it's not good for me, but I feel like I'm gonna do it anyway. That's not predetermined destiny talking, that's your trauma talking. When you look back at his history, you can see that from a young age, Eren has always exhibited violent behavior. He picks fights and continues them even after the other kids want to call it quits. He premeditates this lethal attack against Mikasa's kidnappers. That is not developmentally normal for a 9-year-old. I think Eren's violent behavior is a manifestation of the intergenerational trauma that he's carrying, passed down from both of his parents. The memories of the people within the walls may have been erased, but the body doesn't forget what it has survived and what its ancestors have survived. When Eren says he couldn't stop the eventual outcome, I think what that means is that he couldn't tap into an internal sense of agency that would have allowed him to overcome his trauma responses. He was already carrying so much pain, he couldn't tolerate the profound grief he felt upon learning the reality of the world outside the walls. The only way he could feel in control of his life was to inflict violence and destruction upon the world. But that's not breaking free from the trauma that enslaved him, that's succumbing to repeating the cycle over again. I think an essential part of Mikasa's journey is to let go of any responsibility she feels for Eren's destiny. She wonders if things would have been different if she had given a different answer, but I think what would be healthiest for her is to accept that this is what Eren wanted to do. This is the choice that he made and he bears responsibility for it. Whether or not she does come to accept this by the time that she kills him, I really don't know. A lot of people interpret this moment as Mikasa finally breaking free, and her actions certainly give Ymir the strength that she needs to break free. But by the end of the story, I was still left feeling like there was something important missing from Mikasa's journey, and that was her anger. As a therapist who helps people recover from trauma, abuse, and toxic relationships, I'm always looking for the point when the anger finally comes out. Because when the anger comes out, that means you're finally starting to get in touch with your own needs and your own pain. I kept waiting for the moment when Mikasa would say, "How could you? How could you lie to us? How could you betray the team that worked so hard to protect you? How could you speak to me in such an abusive way? How could you put the world through this pain and suffering? How could you force me to be the one who has to kill you? How could you?" But she never says it. This moment when they're sitting at the table, Mikasa seems like maybe she's contacting her anger, but I actually don't read this emotion as anger, I read it as fear. She's recognizing that she's losing him, but she is terrified of losing him, and so she's experiencing a sense of desperation, trying to make sense of this version of Eren that doesn't compute with the version of him that she has carried in her mind. She's clinging to this idea that Eren must be being influenced by someone else because it's just too threatening to accept the truth that he is hurting her and their comrades because that is the choice he is making of his own volition. Mikasa getting angry at Eren for what he did, I think would have been a big breakthrough for her. But she never contacts her anger towards Eren. Even when she kills him, it's in the sweetest way possible. But I think this is because Mikasa kind of needs to maintain an idealized version of Eren. Remember, Mikasa is still a deeply traumatized person. And now that she no longer has Eren physically with her, she needs to maintain this idea of him as her caretaker, as her protector, as the way that she deals with the trauma that she is still carrying. And I know that a lot of people do interpret Eren's actions as protective in some way. Some people really do see him as having had two choices. Either he could let his homeland be decimated or he could decimate the world. But I simply cannot accept this binary. This whole idea that either we die or you die, it's a form of black and white thinking, and that is a trauma response. Which again, I know all of these characters are drowning in trauma. It's understandable that they succumb to these cognitive distortions and rigid views about the world. But all of this is to say that I don't see Eren's actions in season 4 as heroic, just as I don't see Mikasa's actions throughout the series as romantic. I see both of these characters as deeply unwell people who never had a shot at a healthy relationship because they were too busy trying to survive under threat of genocide, and the trauma was just too constricting for them to be able to grow together. This is the point in the video where I would normally try to formulate a hopeful conclusion about things, but to me, Attack on Titan is just not a hopeful story. It's profoundly nihilistic, and nihilism, while I understand why it exists, is not a worldview that I can endorse. Because I'm in the business of giving people their hope back, not taking it away. In the moments right before she kills Eren, when Mikasa says, "I want to go back," I heard myself say, "Me too." Because I just wanted to go back to the beginning of the series when everyone was learning to fly. And I had a lot of hope that this could turn out to be a story of human resilience and goodness and camaraderie triumphing over senseless violence and destruction. But that's not what I got. That's not what I got. And I guess that's just the way it goes sometimes. What you see outside the walls doesn't turn out to be what you were hoping for. And you gotta figure out a way to live with that. Thank you all so much for watching. If you are not already subscribed, please do subscribe. The more subscribers I get, the easier it will become for me to continue to put out awesome content for you on a regular basis. I love reading all of your thoughts in the comments, so please share them with me. I am looking forward to hearing from you. Once again, my name is Catherine. I am a licensed therapist, and this has been your weekly dose of nerd therapy.